Years ago, I
Mhm.
was a marketing operations consultant, no more, but one of the things that I had working with my clients was explaining things in my head about how things work under the hood. One of my old bosses used to say to me all the time, John, you can explain things to people, but you can't understand it for them. But for me, Lucidchart became a way for me to kind of explain these things. So like I became a power user of a Lucidchart. Actually, your sales team reached out to me and I pitched an idea that I never followed up on. My fault. I called it Kung Fu Marketing with Lucidchart because I felt like a martial arts expert, like punching and kicking way above my weight. But I did find like
Yeah.
MOPS has this challenge of being able to explain the complex processes to other stakeholders. Something we talk about so often on this show is just like, how does MOPS communicate the little wins to people? And sometimes our little wins are really technical. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the challenges of communications in MOPS.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks so much to me, mainly because, like, oftentimes the work that we're doing is explaining complex concepts to an average user or stakeholder, and it's often like a what I feel is a translation problem or a communication issue. I think for me, like, I speak multiple languages, so I'm always constantly translating between like this is what we would say in Spanish, but that's not a one-to-one to what that means in English, and so I think, there's a little bit of empathy there, and oftentimes I use a couple of tactics. So one, right on the nose, like Lucid Chart is a great way to like visually conceptualize things for people. And so it's a great bridge builder. Um, I think like it can be so powerful if it's done correctly, and sometimes it can be done incorrectly, right? Like you can still make a really complex lucid chart and
Yeah.
bring some like, "Ooh, all I see is wiggly lines" to other so they're like, not what I meant to do. This is just the complexity in a visual format. But I think it's a couple of things. So one, like we're in our own world. So I think as like an operator, it's hard to break out of like being in our world and being able to share a concept or like the importance or the why. And so I think for me, I tend to use analogies and tailor visuals or documentation to the audience because I think we blanketly say like, oh, there's an audience. It's one audience. And in reality, you're speaking to multiple audiences and you really need to like ground them. And so I think visuals, when it makes sense, I think sometimes visuals can um, deter in some cases. And then I think that analogies is a good one for me. Like, I think going back to an analogy, like champagne tastes on a beer budget, right? Like, everybody knows what that is, right? Like, small budget, right? But you want Salesforce. That's hard, right? Like, so analogies tend to really work for me. And then I would say the other piece that has been really helpful is around terminology. And you'd be surprised around, like, I just had a conversation this morning where we were talking about lead life cycle with someone on my team. And they're like, what does that mean to you? And I was like, this is a great grounding conversation, right? Because how do you expect with such a broad term for everyone to really understand what that means and really define expectations in the same way? And so one key thing that I've done to like presentations or even visuals is have like a term sheet of like, especially for enrichment, I've done this where I was like, enrichment isn't prospecting, right? It isn't intent data. Those are all different things. Like there's firmographic, demographic. And so pulling those out because when you're talking about these concepts, if they all feel like it's bundled, you're never going to be able to land all the concepts well. So
Hmm.
putting in decks like key terms, having some visuals, making sure they're simple, and then bringing in as many analogies as possible is super helpful. I also will say that while I've done all those things, there's just times where people are just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And kind of as you grow in leadership, influencing to be able to do that. And sometimes that means like prepping an executive to tell their other executive friend, like, here's what she needs you to know. And I've done like bullet points, like, here are the 5 things I need you to hit. Here's a visual, tell it to your friend.